So it's my pleasure to invite a friend of Pumps and Pipes, a neuroscientist, a colleague, and the executive director of Site R Exchange, Dr. Jancy McPhee. She's gonna talk to us about STEAM in space. So everybody, please welcome Jancy McPhee.
All right, everyone. I presume you can hear me and I'm just the right loud and not too loud? All right, excellent. I am thrilled to be back at Pumps and Pipes. It's been a couple of years. I kind of had some growing up that I did here over the decade plus, so it's really a pleasure to see you all again. And as Nicole graciously explained, I am actually a scientist by training, but I'm going to start and tell you a little bit more about me. So I actually grew up in a humanities home. My mother was extremely interested in the fine arts and in literature, but I was always a keen observer of nature, and also I was lucky enough to go to a public school where I had fantastic science teachers. So when I got to college, it was a little bit dismaying that I had to choose between STEM and the arts, because it felt to me as though I had to close doors when I did so. But I did decide to grow up and become a neuroscientist. I am a cellular and molecular neuroscientist by training. And I selected neuroscience because it seemed to me the best way to combine all of my interests, since it's the biology of how we think and create and move and have feelings. So it was my compromise to bring everything together. And this is one of the molecules that I studied over my 17-year lab bench experience. And then I had the pleasure of moving into the space community and to work in space life sciences as well, to think about how do we protect humans on exploration missions and to keep them healthy and able to perform. So what we're going to talk about today is actually some nonprofit work that I'm doing to bring together STEM plus the arts, but to set the stage, and because not everybody is a space person for their day job, I'm going to talk a little bit about the amazing, awesome, cool stuff that is happening in space right now. So as you know, for almost 25 years, we've had the International Space Station orbiting the planet in low Earth orbit. And people have been living and working on that station continuously for more than 2 decades. But now it's really amazing because there are new private companies coming in to create new stations that will be in low Earth orbit, that will provide more environments for people to live and work. And as you know, there are also companies like SpaceX who are taking people up for 5 to 7 day journeys in space, and we're planning to go on to the moon and then onward to Mars. So it's just an incredibly exciting time in space. And what's really, really interesting and relevant here is that through all of these efforts, there is now an opportunity for a broader sector of the human population to actually go into space. It's not just agency astronauts anymore. As Dr. Lumsden said this morning, we may even be sending people with some medical challenges as well. And this is both an opportunity for us to understand more about what happens to different people, different kinds of people in space, but it's also a challenge because we have to prepare for a larger and broader sector of humanity to go into space and get those people engaged, and they are going to be part of an intense workforce. They're going to be the staff. They're going to be doing research and manufacturing in space. So we have a lot of work to prepare ourselves for this future of space. So let's talk a little bit more about exactly what's going to happen on some of these space missions. Everyone probably in this room knows that NASA has embarked on the Artemis mission to return to the moon. And you probably also know that Artemis is different from Apollo. There's going to be a much more diverse community of people who will actually go up and experience the moon in orbit and on the surface of the moon than ever before. It's going to be an international group of astronauts. There will be men and women, people of different races and backgrounds and medical history. One of the things that I find most interesting about what we're doing is that we're really trying to rally the international community behind this, and we intend to do a ton of science on this mission, which is different from Apollo. It is truly a science mission, and it is also an opportunity to figure out how to live and work longer on a planetary surface to enable those grander missions onward to Mars. But space is out to kill you. We didn't adapt in the space environment, we adapted here on Earth. And we think of 5 different hazards of the space environment, and all of those are challenging our health and ability to perform in space. The most obvious hazard that most of you probably think about is radiation. And we don't just mean solar radiation, we mean the constant background of galactic cosmic radiation, that when you are flying in space, you are exposed to that bath of radiation, and that could have long-term health consequences. As you all know, you are enjoying 1G sitting down nicely in your seat right now, but when you are in orbit or in transit in space, you are effectively living in weightlessness or 0G. Thanks to this International Space Station, we know quite a bit about what happens to the human body in the absence of gravity. Your bones and muscles change, your heart changes, your vision and potentially your brain is also changing due to a lot of different factors, including the massive fluid shift that happens when gravity is no longer there, drawing things down into your lower extremities. So we have a lot of work to understand how to protect humans, especially when they return to a planetary environment that now has a higher gravity. And we don't have a lot of information about what will happen on the surface of the moon at 1.6G or on the surface of Mars at 3.8G. We just know what happens at 1 and what happens at 0. So lots of work to be done there to prepare us to move further. Hostile enclosed environments, we're going to have to bring our own air. We heard about bringing our own food. We know about water systems, our own ability to create fixes in space. There's been an awful lot of really interesting talks this morning that are very relevant here. There will be lots of challenges that happen in orbit to keep the environment safe for us to live and work in. And what happens when you're on a 2 or 3 year mission to Mars? There's no chance for resupply, communication is delayed, you are with those same people for years. And I don't know about you, but my family has an 8-day camping trip limit, and then we all need a half a day by ourselves. So isolation and confinement is an enormous factor as for the individual and the team dynamics. And then lastly, I mentioned distance from Earth. There's going to be a greater need for autonomy. Those new crews in orbit and on the surface of the planet need to be able to do things on their own, need to have the right tools and robots to support them as well. So, as you can imagine, that really lets us know that we have a ton of science and technology challenges ahead. But as we have been talking a little bit this morning, we also really need the workforce, but we also need to figure out the ethics and the strategy and many different aspects to enable these missions to really get humanity further into space. And I believe that there are many, but I will focus on 3 aspects that will be needed in order to allow us to move further into space to overcome all of these challenges ringing this image of Mars. And those aspects are communication, creative problem solving, and diverse team collaboration. And so those are the things that I would like to talk about and to convince you are important elements. So we'll start with communication. So it's not sufficient enough to just tell people what's going on. You need to tell them why it's important. How you say it does matter. And so you need to get people passionate and engaged so they want to learn more and they want to be a part of it and they understand what's happening. Similarly, we know from science that telling a story is an effective way to communicate about science and technology and important things that are happening to us. It's how we kept our history over time. It also triggers a bunch of hormonal reactions in all of us that actually help us to better understand and remember things that we're being told. And a great oversimplification of what it means to be a creative problem solver is, if you think about it, creativity happens when you connect two previously disconnected experiences or bits of knowledge in a creative way that is also useful when you test it against reality. But that means that you need to have not just a detailed, but also a broad experience base in order to have more material for that creative thinking. In addition, it's important to recognize your mental approaches when you are trying to solve a problem. Humans are creatures of habit. We all tend to use the same approach that we've been trained in, that we know and love. But it's important to be aware of other ways to approach problem solving and have the capability to work with others who do not approach problems the same way we do. And that sounds pretty simple, but how many engineers or scientists are working directly with artists and can work collaboratively and effectively to create those solutions? And then the last element that I want to highlight here is being creative is hard. We heard some great stories this morning about all the challenges of creating important technologies that are going to change the world. The important things are never really easy, or they really would have already happened. So being motivated is important. So that passion and that understanding is one of the key door openers to understanding more. So what might be the role of the arts? This is a steaming space talk, so obviously I'm eventually going to get to the arts. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story. Back in 2010, I was on a scientific planning committee for an international space life sciences conference. And the director said that let's call this the next golden age of human spaceflight. And for some reason, that was my particular light bulb moment when I realized, I looked around the room, we were all old, and I said, okay, we can plan that, but it takes decades to execute that. So we need to engage young people who are currently young now, in our planning for the future, so that they're invested and they're ready to carry the torch and have the skills that they need to solve these hard problems and challenges for us. But in order to speak across different age groups and about inherently highly technical information in an engaging way, I needed a language. And that's when I went back to growing up with the arts, and all of my hobbies are music and theater, in case you haven't figured that out yet. And so I was able to draw from that experience base in a way I never expected, because I am not a professional in the arts. And I said, let's try the arts. So why the arts? Well, we already know from professional art how important and engaging and how well the arts can tell the story of the future and the future of space exploration, and also the facts of what's happening. There are factual and imagined things here. It's extremely engaging. It tells us the why. It gives us the passion. One of my favorite images is the top center here. How many people know what movie that's from? All right. Okay, we're all dating ourselves. 2001: A Space Odyssey, 60 years ago. They were talking about creating artificial gravity environments by continuously rotating a space vehicle in space. Right now, the first people are trying to actually create that. You had to imagine it first, took 60 years later, and now they're actually going to try it. In addition, art, of course, is an amazing way to make people want to be engaged. It creates role models. Again, dating myself, do you know what TV show my outfit is from? Please, somebody tell me that you know. Okay, thank you. That's the original Star Trek. And what's more is the arts can tell us a story in a sequence of symbols that don't require a white paper and get people impassioned and interested in learning more about the stem behind it and really gaining an understanding. And maybe you already knew this, but when you bring the arts and STEM together, you actually innovate. So your cell phone, and I know every one of you has one, was actually derived from teams of people working in the arts and technologies that were engaged, that were being previously used and developed in the arts. And there are lots of examples like that. Did you also know that many of the best scientists and technologists, the majority, are engaging in the arts as adults? So there's got to be some kind of, even if all you care about is STEM, there's got to be some kind of connection there. So I had this opportunity back in 2010 to use the arts to engage young people in an actual science conference, a space conference, but I didn't tell you how. I'm going to tell you that in a minute. But the activities that I did led me to actually spin off a nonprofit called Art Exchange. And its job was to break down the stovepipes between STEM and the arts to foster engagement, innovation, and collaboration in space, science, and technology through multiple activities. That inaugural activity was we hosted something called the Humans in Space Art Competition, where we invited people around the world to create multimedia artwork about the future of space exploration and to share their visions of what that future would look like. It started with those children back in 2010, and some of their artwork is over near the door, but it branched out to include adults, early career professionals. Those are some of those examples are located here, but we've also worked with professional artists by educating them with the science and technology behind what we're doing. And then also we have worked with professional scientists and engineers to steam the bottom line message of the work that they're doing. But it's not enough just to engage the participants. You need to let that artwork tell the story and get everybody excited. So we have woven that artwork into displays and live performances online, locally around the world, and in space, so that now the artwork is getting everyone excited and informed and understanding about the future and wanting to be a part of it and wanting to learn more. So I told you we had contests and tours, but that's not all that we're doing. We've recently tried our hand in, this was less than a year ago, this was January, in the Dallas-Richardson area, in creating a physical installation. So as a scientist, I've always been extremely interested in our complex large data sets. And we've been talking a lot about how do we deal with all the large data that's coming out? How do we make it accessible and understandable? You know, we talked a lot about AI. Well, scientists have a tendency to turn everything into a visual data plot, a histogram, or a line curve. What if we sonified it? What if we transformed the data into something that was multisensory to give ourselves an opportunity to understand those data better, both as scientists, but also as the public that we wanted to reach? That's what Sensing Deep Space Pandora's Cluster was about. So we started with space telescope data from the James Webb, Chandra, Hubble, and we wanted to teach people about Pandora's cluster, which is a galaxy cluster 4 billion light years away. How do we understand about the space telescopes? How do we understand the data that we collect? How do we understand the cluster better? Here's a short trailer of what we created in Richardson to translate that data into both an interactive and a multi-sensory exhibit. And I'll tell you a bit more about it in a minute. So what you're seeing here is an immersive art exhibit with audio-visual artwork created from the James Webb Space Telescope data that preserves the meaning of the data. It wasn't some random artwork, which can be pretty, but it actually preserved it. And then part of it was that the visitors could actually manipulate the space data through a touch screen, which then changed their audio-visual environment. So it was a way to experience the data that was still preserving some integrity of the data. And our artists worked very closely with astrophysicists from the Space Science and Telescope Institute to talk about how to encode this data, take the original data, preserve the meaning of it. We created a bunch of auxiliary materials, video podcasts, materials online, and it was really a fascinating journey of bringing this STEAM team together. And the feedback has been really amazing. And if you want to talk about this later, we can talk about it. What's very interesting is when you really balance science and technology with the arts, people tend to segment themselves. There were people who wanted to come and sit and absorb the art, take their selfie in the galaxy, experience it and feel it. And there were others at that touchscreen, man, who were just manipulating that data. I want to know more. I want to understand the science. How did the artist turn this into science? Tell me more. And so it was really, really interesting. This was a pilot study for us to really see what happened when we tried to create this balance. And we are hoping to bring this to Houston. That is our future goal. And anybody who wants to talk with me about that possibility later, I would love to do so. I also have ideas for future exhibits. This was the macroscopic installation. When we're done showing this one off, I'd like to do the microscopic installation. So these multisensory installations will help us to understand and experience data that we cannot access with just our own eyes and ears naturally. The last thing I'm going to talk about is we do have an open activity. We've been talking a lot about how space benefits Earth. This particular project is a spin-off of something that Nicole Pardo and I did back in COVID times when we were encouraging people around the world to imagine their isolated habitats and to share that with people around the world and to take lessons from astronauts and engineers and architects talking about the naturally isolated conditions of space and how you thrive and not just survive in space. Well, it's years later. Let's move out of that isolated mentality and start to talk about those communities in space. We're going to the moon. We're going to Mars. What are those communities going to look like? They're going to have to be sustainable. And how does what we learn about how to live and work sustainably in space inform us on how to benefit our lives here on Earth? It's open. It's for all ages. You create artwork. You share it with us and online. And there are also some resources for students, and we have been working with some schools to bring this program into their schools as well. So it's about communities in space and on Earth and drawing that connection. And as I mentioned, we have webinar series and resources. That's astronaut Nicole Stott. The other is the artist who did that first artwork there, Mars is in our DNA. We like to say once sired exchange, always sired exchange. And we have been fortunate enough to have some reasonable impact, but I want to stress that if you want to change the world, And you want to impact large numbers, you have to do it one person at a time. And so the joy is in the individual responses to what happens when we encourage people to use their whole brain and not just half of it. But in order to STEAM and really create change and solve those grand challenges in space and on Earth, we need to do it together. It's going to take a village, and I encourage all of you to please join the movement and follow us to hear about open opportunities and more things about STEAM. If you've got some ideas for venues and partners for bringing the installation to Houston, please let us know. And I am totally happy to brainstorm with any of you afterwards about how do we STEAM space, science, and technology. So thank you.